Hello and welcome to this episode of Conscious Design Podcast, where sustainability meets innovation and business savvy. I'm your host, Ian Peterman, CEO and founder of the Peterman Design Firm, hub for green tech and visionary ideas. Join me as we chat with Daniel Kurzrock. He's the CEO and co-founder of Upcycled Food Inc., where they're helping the food industry become more circular. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ian. Great to be here, and great subject for your show. I'm thrilled to participate.
Absolutely. Well, food is a big problem to solve. So kudos to deciding that this was the thing that you were going to tackle. Let's jump back in time a little bit. What got you to decide, hey, food waste is what the problem that I want to work on?
I got into the world of trying to play a role in solving food waste actually through a hobby of brewing beer underage as a college student.
Oh, amazing. Amazing start to the story.
So I learned how to make beer when I was a freshman at UCLA, which years ago now, 2008, 2009 was when we started doing that. And absolutely loved the hobby. It was a lot of fun to be able to buy the ingredients and make beer. Of course, never drank any of it because that would be illegal, but nothing illegal about purchasing the ingredients and brewing the beer.
You can produce it, you just can't touch it.
That's right. And so we got into making beer every week. And really, have you ever made beer before, Ian?
I have not, but I have family that makes beers and wines, and it is an interesting. I've always been fascinated. The chemistry that goes into making it work is fascinating.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, beer is food. It's a product of the land. There's really 4 simple ingredients in making beer. You've got your water, and you've got your grain, your malt. It's typically a barley-based, if you're making it in a traditional way. And then there's hops, which people who are IPA drinkers, very familiar with hops, and yeast, which is where the magic happens. And in the beer making process, it's you can get quite sophisticated in how you do it, but we've been making beer as a species basically since we stopped being nomadic, going way back to ancient Mesopotamia and before, where you're basically taking water and you're mixing it with the grains, and home brewer kind of looks like you're making a big batch of like porridge, for like a breakfast oatmeal. And in making this, what's called the mash, you then separate the liquid from that, and that's where and it's like this sweet liquid called wort. It's like a sugary liquid that gets fermented with the yeast. But you're left with this grain, the physical grain itself, that's been soaked in this beer making process. And as a beer maker, you're done with this material after you've taken that wort from the mash. And we're in this college environment where this is a hobby, where hobbies cost money, right? And it felt like we were throwing away some of our throwing away food, throwing away our ingredients. We couldn't use it to make beer, but I started wondering what could be done with this so-called spent grain that was an unavoidable co-product. And I don't like to use the word byproduct, an unavoidable co-product of the hobby of making beer. So after a little bit of research, was pretty floored to learn of the nutritional value of it, but also that there's a pretty rich history of human consumption of brewer's grain in baked goods over time. Just nothing really commercially, but we weren't the first to think of, hey, what can we do with this stuff? And I'm sure we'll get into at an industrial scale what that looks like today. But on a home brewer's level, in the college environment, we didn't even have a vegetable garden with a compost bin, let alone chickens or goats or cows or whatever to feed this to. And when I learned that you can make bread with it, I thought, oh, okay, what would be kind of clever is if we made loaves of bread with the grain that's left over from the beer making process, and then sold the loaves of bread, and then used the proceeds from that to invest in another batch of ingredients, and we could have this kind of self-funded system. Yeah, exactly. So that's how it all got started, which led to a series of ill-advised and increasingly large questions about what's happening in the industry and the food system. And it wasn't until 2012, but really 2014, when we started getting a really good handle globally on like how much food we're actually wasting at a macro level. There's a landmark report that the NRDC put out called Wasted. that really helped open a lot of our eyes and realize that a lot of our efforts were actually a part of this broader set of solutions that we would need in order to build a more resilient food system that was better capable of feeding our growing population and wasting less. Came out in 2014 that we're wasting about 40% of all food that we're growing. I didn't know any of that when I started the business. What I knew was that every time I made a 6-pack of beer, I had a pound of grain, and that grain didn't have any sugar in it pretty much no sugar in it because the sugar ends up in the beer, which leaves protein and fiber, lots of good stuff. And that I had a pound of it for every 6-pack of beer that I was producing. And it just seemed like good common sense to do more with it than put it in a dumpster.
Well, you can just think about how many 6-packs were just drank on 4th of July alone. That's a lot of food right there.
Oh, it's wild. When you zoom out, we estimate in the U.S. every year there's about 20 billion pounds of brewer's grain that could be available for... Which is hard to contextualize. So if you kind of do the back of the napkin math on that, if you turn it into a flour, an ingredient to make bread, for example, which is a big part of our business today. If you were to do it with all the grain in the U.S., you could make I forget what the exact figure is right now. It's been a little while since we've done it, but it comes down to 2 or 3 dozen loaves of bread per American per year.
2 or 3 dozen.
Yeah, per person, just from the grain that's already been used to make beer. So this is a material that's been cultivated, right? Grain is an agricultural product. It has, inputs in terms of water and labor and, everything that it takes to grow food, right? It's been harvested, it's been processed, to make malt. It's kind of like a sprouting process. So there's this value-added step that happens. Then it gets to the brewery, and breweries aren't wasteful. It's not like they could be doing anything to not also have this grain when they're making beer. It is an unavoidable co-product of the beer making process. And so we got really inspired to try to connect the dots in a new way and see if we can improve the way that we're valuing this resource that we saw to be very overlooked and undervalued by the status quo.
Yeah, the most I've heard about is it makes really good feed for animals. I grew up around Portland, Oregon, and that was one of the things that some of the breweries there started to promote. All of our spent grain, after we're done, we ship it out to the farms nearby, and it's good. So as you described, right, it's really good nutritional value. So it's great for feeding to the animals. But that was kind of only a few breweries did it, or at least talked about it, and it was never.
So now it's about 80% actually, approximately of the breweries, are sending their grain to different animal feed, end uses. And so the status quo with this is, fortunately in the U.S., it's not that all of this is ending up in a landfill, breaking down into methane and, contributing, directly to greenhouse gas emissions in the way that, food in a landfill does. Although breweries around the world, we make beer everywhere as humans that we live. And we've spoken with breweries in parts of the world that are incinerating it, some that are landfilling it, some that are land applying it, which is basically Latin for spread it out on the field and let it break down over time, which does produce some methane, right? It's not like a municipal compost system or directed composting service. There's a lot that can be done with it, and our whole thesis is that what we're trying to help do is move this status quo from going to the path of least resistance, which even if it's going to animal feed, that's the path of least resistance, but it's not the path of highest value, right? And the path of highest value for any food is feed it directly to people, especially when we're living in a food system where food waste does not cause hunger, right? But this is in the U.S. About between 1 in 7, 1 in 8 people are unsure of where their next meal is going to come from. Our food insecurity rates are really high, and if you look at nutritional deficiencies and gaps and things like that, one of the most striking is fiber. Almost no one eats enough fiber. For example, less than 10%, of Americans get enough fiber, in their diet. And this is an ingredient where if you put, it in a bread at 10%, 15%, you get to a good source or high fiber claim, on a finished product. And so all signs were pointing to this kind of crazy idea of, hey, the way that we've been doing things, has some momentum, some inertia, right? But that doesn't mean it's the best way to do it, and maybe we can create a new win-win, for the stakeholders that are involved. this aspect of our food system. And now we've started to apply it to other stuff, which maybe we'll get into in this conversation. Beyond brewer's grain, there's a lot of agricultural side streams and other food production and processing side streams that have similar opportunities where there's this overlooked and undervalued potential supply chain, that's being handled as a waste stream by conventional business.
Well, this dovetails perfectly into a conversation about circularity, right? This concept of, right, a waste stream automatically means that you're a linear process, right? There's a dead end rather than looking at it. And you meant, agricultural waste. The more I dive into different areas, like I'm part of a hemp company for industrial use. We're diving into other fibers, and there's like, the sugar cane, they just burn everything that isn't turned into refined sugar. And it's just, there's so many of these different areas in our food system, right? That it's like, we're burning it. Why? What else can we do with it? There's got to be something else besides burning it. Burning it doesn't really help anybody. It might be fast. It might be quick. Pour some gas on it, burn it. Like, yes, I get that, but it's not. I love how you put it. It's not. It is the path of least resistance, but it's not the highest value. And I think that shift of going, all right, it's waste, but is it really waste? Like what? And this is something that when I've talked to people and done some research, the idea of waste is really only something that's come into our collective consciousness in the last 150 years. There was no, go back to the 1800s, there is no waste.
It's also only humans. It's also only humans that have waste.
Yes, correct. There's no animals that waste. There's no, nature doesn't do it. We weren't really into wasting things. It was, there's a lot of survival based. And then we shifted this mentality over, and now we'll just burn it all because we think it's waste.
Yeah. In nature, I mean, there's this principle of permaculture for anyone who is like a nerd about this kind of stuff.
Permaculture.
On your class, yeah, where it's actually like the waste. Waste equals food. It's this idea that we're really bringing to light in a very literal sense. Not to yuck the yum of anyone, upcycled foods are absolutely delicious, and it's not like you're dumpster diving to get these materials. We can talk about get more into that, but this principle of hey, and like where can we find inspiration from nature? It's really central tenet of circularity, and it's not just the food system that has this extractive model of take, make, waste, right? That would benefit from more circular thinking. And it's important to we feel it's important to really try to think more in it's very overused. I almost hesitate to say it in a recorded podcast, but like an ecosystem, right? I mean, it's literally how we should be thinking, where there may be materials that originate in the food system that are actually best applied in other sectors. For example, we're recording this the weekend after the 4th of July holiday. I don't know when it will air, but many of us probably had barbecues and things like that. We have these new plates in our household that are they're dishwasher safe, they are microwavable, and they look just like a plastic plate, but instead of being made from reusable, right, it's not a single-use thing, instead of being made from like a petrochemical plastic, they're made from wheat straw. That's an agricultural side stream of what had been conventionally considered to be inedible, kind of valueless, material. And so there's this shift in thinking that we really need to have around what, to your point, what is waste, right? What, and food waste and food loss, there's some nuance in the definition between the two, but the bottom line across all of it is that we should be finding as many opportunities as possible to put food to its highest and best use, feeding people. And that's what we're all about.
Yeah, there's, to one of your points about food and that waste going to something else, there is, I think it was 3M went and they found out they could use the fibers, I think it was from the agave plants that they use for tequila, and then all that fiber, right, they're making tequila with it, but all the fiber, they were actually integrating that into sponges that they made. And they were able to make these cleaning scrubby sponge things out of tequila waste. And it was something they were burning it in the fields, and then They were like, "Hey, we like that fiber. Actually, can we have that instead of we'll come pick it up and you don't burn it?"
Yeah, and I think you're knocking on the door of an important point, which is that waste is food. Waste is also money, right? And so this is one of the areas of climate solutions where there's not necessarily the same trade-offs you might expect in other areas. There's still plenty of challenges, and we can get into those too. But there's a very clear business incentive to take a cost center and turn it into a profit center, right? And in some cases that can happen internally. So like a tequila company might be able to take some of their agave waste and work with a packaging supplier and turn it into the box, that the tequila comes in, or something like that. That's like kind of like an internal, model of circularity, which I think is often how for people who know of circularity, think of it in that context of like, kind of almost a closed system. And, when we take a little bit of a broader view of circular design principles in that we feel that kind of ecosystem metaphor is, where what comes into play here, where there may be waste from one sector that is actually a valuable input for another, sort of the one man's trash, another man's treasure, type of adage commercially, right? There's a lot of examples of this. It's also it's worth noting, Ian, that this is not a new idea. We've got some new language to talk about it. We've certainly got some new urgency, around implementing these kinds of solutions with the direction our climate crisis is going and the pace of it. But the idea of doing more with less is old. This is an old thought. You look at our great grandmothers and how they used to make chicken broth out of the chicken bones. For example, that's like an old school example of kind of the ideas that are captured by upcycling, or chefs that are trained in or the whole animal, the whole vegetable. Anyway, like a trained chef in the French tradition, knows to like all these different ways of using the whole animal nose to tail, root to stock, type of thinking. Or even on an industrial scale, you look at a product like whey protein, an animal protein, that's derived from dairy. That's a co-product of cheese making. It used to be a waste stream decades ago.
And now it's a really big industry.
Yeah, and now there's some cases where cheese is actually the byproduct of making whey. It's just, there hasn't been enough of a vigorous, proactive approach, we feel, to identifying where there's other examples of overlooked, undervalued supply chains, and then collecting those dots and then connecting them through to commercial applications. And that's what we decided to build our business around, is identifying those raw materials, prioritizing them based on end market applications, and really trying to help the market do what it wants to do anyways, but is currently failing to do today based on business as usual.
Hey, it's Ian here. So glad you're enjoying this episode of Conscious Design. If you want the full scoop on conscious design, what it is, how we do it, how you can do it, then check out our book. We wrote it so creative entrepreneurs like you can code social and environmental responsibility right into your brand's DNA. You can download the first chapter for free. Link is in the description. Enjoy the rest of the episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.
Yeah, I think the whole concept, Brave, of waste and the value chain. And this is there's a guy out of Norway that he works in electronics recycling, just wrote a book that I helped contribute to, and one of the things that he repeats over and over, because it's people get it but not everybody thinks about it, is when you create circularity, you are adding value. And there's a lot of people, I mentioned to you, I've been to DC, I've talked to people trying to explain circularity and how it's not going to ruin anybody's day. It's actually going to make more. It's taking that value chain. When you complete the circle rather than just dead ending it, it's not like you're taking what's value there and you're spreading it out thinner. You're actually adding value. You're taking stuff that there's companies that pay, right? They pay a disposal company to come take their waste away. That could be an income stream instead of something they spend money to get rid of, right? So that there's all these things, and when you think about it that way, you start to go, oh, I have these coffee grounds, I have these agave plants, I have all the spent barley from making beer. It can actually be useful somewhere else. And not everybody thinks about it though, right? I'm an expert brewer. they're not doing anything. They're not a baker. They're not over in these other areas. And I think that's when you talk about circularity, right? There's circularity locally and then globally. We need to engage more with the global part, because that's when you'll have somebody go, oh, I could use that. You don't touch it at all. Like, it's garbage to you, but I actually need all of it over here.
Yeah, I'll give you a fun example of that. I mean, if you look at like plant-based protein industry here in the U.S., pea protein has emerged as a leading protein. It's traditionally been dominated in the plant-based space by soy. And so pea protein's gotten really popular. A co-product of the pea protein production process is pea starch. Now, and then that's kind of a waste stream, for pea protein processors here in the U.S. If you go to China and other parts of Asia, the starch is actually the primary product because it's used to make things like noodles, and the protein is actually a co-product, that is handled as a waste stream, sold for animal feed, right? And I mean, that's not to say I've never done the global LCA to kind of net out with ocean freight or whatever to get those two, but it's kind of I find it to be a pretty striking example of how in one part of the world something can be the same agricultural input can be going to a completely different primary product, like the inverse as elsewhere in the world. And it's this principle of I really like to describe it as doing more with less. I definitely didn't coin that term, but I have some friends who kind of shifted the way I think about it in the industry, the founders of the Spare Food Company, Adam and Jeremy Kay, and they talk about, it's not about doing more with less, it's actually about doing more with more, finding ways to do more with more. And who doesn't want more, especially in America, right? This is
more is better, right?
Yeah, more is more. And in a lot of cases, better. So that's a little bit as to how to think about it. And I think it might be mentioning, especially given the focus of the show, Ian, that when we talk about circularity and about waste reduction on that side of it and food, when you zoom out a little bit and think about just nature positive design, overall, and with food, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has a really lovely framework, for this, and it captures also looking at the upstream solutions that we need around regenerative agriculture, for example. So, upcycling and food waste innovation and circularity, this is all downstream, right? After things have already been made, trying to get them back into processes. But, it's really most powerful when it's also a part of a larger system that is really thoughtful about the way that we're producing that food in the first place, and specifically to improve soil health, nutrient density. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that you should probably you probably already have had a regenerative agriculture expert on the show. But I always like to bring up regenerative ag and upcycling together because they're really allies, in the same mission of advancing solutions that are, nature positive, for food.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of explain that, right? Because we, as an average consumer, right, you just see the end product. You go, oh, there's beer, and I know there's the spent grain, but also, like we were talking about, right, there's the grain, and then there's the stock that got thrown away before that grain even got to the brewery, right? There's these waste points all along this supply chain, and we're all focused at the end loop, oh, make this, but it's just one of a long series of events that can be improved, that those wastes could go to be useful somewhere else. And it's not just one, it's not just one thing we're throwing away. There's a lot of value.
And even with what we're not throwing away directly, right? What we really try to help encourage people to shift the paradigm of how they're thinking about it. It's also where there's the opportunity cost, right? Of maybe it's not being thrown away, but what else could be done? One example I like to share with folks is coffee. Do you drink coffee, Ian?
Yes.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. So in the production of coffee, what we're really consuming, to the framework you introduced in this this last point is it's the bean, right? You buy coffee beans, roasted coffee beans from the store, or you maybe buy a brewed coffee from a cafe. But that bean, actually started as the pit of a fruit. That fruit has potential value. It's got, it's real value. It's got antioxidants. It's got caffeine. It's got flavor. The coffee berry or the coffee cherry, also known as cascara in the industry, That's a co-product of the coffee processing. That fruit that contains the bean grows on a tree. Guess what? That tree has leaves. Coffee leaves also have wonderful flavor, very rich source of antioxidants with a lot of beneficial health properties. And when you start thinking about the coffee plant as producing potentially 3 products, not just one, that's a lot more opportunity for farmers too, who typically are only able to sell their coffee for a third of the year. And so there's this Russian doll effect of like positive benefits that thinking in this way can produce for people and planet and businesses. The triple bottom line, profit, the third one, if we're doing the P's. That we don't really understand why things aren't already working this way. We're delighted, I guess, to have the opportunity to try to inspire more action, to that end.
Yeah, I really tie this kind of thinking, and I'm the same way. It's our systems seem to be they're extremely efficient if you look at it one-dimensionally. Like, if you want a coffee bean, we're really efficient at getting coffee beans. We're not really efficient at maximizing the value of all the work that goes into cultivating the land, growing the plants, harvesting, right? As you're talking about, you're harvesting a whole fruit and you're pitting it. That'd be like, I don't know, taking a peach, throwing away 90% of it. We're like, I got a pit. I'm very excited about the pit, which is something most fruit, we throw that away. That is not.
Yeah, actually, you can turn stone fruit pits into alternative dairy solutions. There's a company doing that, even. So I'm your guy for like examples from all over the world of any food that you can think of. And I really appreciate the way that you're framing it. And for folks that are uninitiated to food waste more generally, the way to kind of like a heuristic that you can be thinking about is when we're talking about how much food is wasted globally, it's like the equivalent of leaving the grocery store with 5 bags of groceries and then just dropping 2 of them in the parking lot. And we're just like,
it's fine.
Meant to have 5, got 3. Okay. Who's okay with who should be okay with that? Nobody.
3 out of 5. Yeah, nobody considers 3 out of 5 a good record for any.
Especially not you with 6 kids, right? It's every bag of groceries matters.
Yeah, not a good way to run that. It's not. No one would like that.
Yeah.
No.
Get them all home. Yeah.
Yeah, only 3 of 5 kids made it home. We're good. That's all we need. Yeah, it's a crazy amount, and that's just the food, right? And that number is just, it's just the coffee bean. It's not the rest of the process. It's not the leaves. It's not all the other things that you could possibly do with it.
Well, so what we found is it's really difficult to get an accurate measure of these like co-products that represent opportunities. Because part of this is like food loss versus food waste, and it really does kind of blow up the denominator. So food, this might get a bit academic. To keep it like fairly high level, if you think of a crop like coffee, this example that we've been using, you could argue that the leaves and the fruit are food loss, but they're not. Whereas if like expired coffee would be food waste, that's getting thrown out because it hasn't been used. So a much deeper rabbit hole we could go down in that, but I think that's one of maybe the easiest ways to think about it. If you think of like corn, the cob is food is part of the food waste. Anything that happens to the cob, becomes food waste. But one of the great for people who really want to like get nerdy about this beyond the confines of a podcast recording, there's a lot of great resources out there. One of the best for just like insights and analysis for slicing and dicing the problem in different sectors and everything is ReFed, REFED. ReFed as an organization has put together a food waste monitor tool on their website, and they even rate like how confident they are in the quality of the data for the different sections, and you can sort things by types of food waste by cause, sort by economic value, by tonnage of food that's lost, and there's just a huge amount of resources there for anyone that wants to dive deeper.
Oh yeah, and I know we could definitely dive really deep into those, but I always find it interesting and good to point out differences in language, because there's one of the things that almost always comes up anytime I talk to a company or anybody about materials is like biodegradable. If you're familiar, right? There is not just one kind of biodegradable. There's people who will market it as if it's all the same, but there's different grades of biodegradable and different ways to biodegrade. So it's those language pieces especially if you're making business decisions about it, sometimes that terminology can make and break you if you don't understand what it actually means.
I agree. Yeah, language is incredibly powerful, and it's something that I think a lot of us in the sustainable innovation space broadly struggle with, because there's also this kind of countervailing force of companies. I'm going to we'll attribute this to companies, that do as traditionally called greenwashing, right? Where they kind of take this term that is at one point was like a pretty accurate way to describe what was happening, and then use it in a way that dilutes its meaning, and that for us really underscored the importance of third-party certification, and the role of trust and transparency and ensuring the veracity of these claims. And one of the things that we've been involved with, which we can get into if it's interesting to you, is maybe
I want
the audience.
There's so many, because that's a whole other area, right? Of going, all right, I want a third party. Which one? Which? Yeah,
and which certs, right? And they're not mutually exclusive, and none of them are free, right? But they do, and they shouldn't be free, right? But they do matter. And in 2019, we got together with a handful of peers and competitors and co-founded a nonprofit called the Upcycled Food Association and Foundation, and actually worked together, with some cross-sectoral collaboration as well, to define upcycled foods, give it a formal definition, and use that then as the foundation to develop third-party certification standard, which has now been out in the market for 2-3 years. It's now being administered by Where Food Comes From, which is a third-party certifying body. One of the ones that you're referring to, and so companies now, have the option to actually have, and they should do this, because this is what works for consumers too. It's actually ensuring trust, earning trust by being transparent, right, and by ensuring the veracity of those claims and matter. In a world in which greenwashing is just a reality.
Yeah, it's really good not only to define it, but then the transparency part is not, it shouldn't be a secret definition that exists somewhere off. It's educating a customer. The average, whoever your average consumer base is, they have to understand it, because otherwise it starts to lose meaning. I was speaking of food things, and you probably want to have some thoughts on this. I was talking on LinkedIn or something like that about, there's certified organic, and then there's regenerative certified organic. And there's a conversation just about what does it actually mean? And then I think someone was like, well, you can go through the certification, you fill out some forms, and you're now regenerative. And so then it changed into well, what is it actually then? If it's just a form, is it really how does the average consumer tell the difference? Do they even care at this point? Are we going into greenwashing? How? So I'm curious about your thoughts on regenerative, organic. There seems to be more and more layers to this.
Yeah, well, and there's nuance, right? And nuance is not good for consumers, right? Who only have a couple seconds to review a package. And in terms of the actual differences between the two, there's actually a lot of them, and they matter. Conventional, for example, conventional organic is, you could think it matters, and you could think of it as being less bad than conventional food production. It's not using chemical, synthetic pesticides and fertilizer, soil inputs, right? Synthetic inputs. It's organic. It's better than that previous alternative. but it's not necessarily producing the most benefits. Like regenerative organic is, as opposed to being less bad, is actually like actively good. You know, and there are a lot of, it's true that there are a lot of organic farmers that are farming with regenerative principles. They're intercropping, they're incorporating animals, you know, with pasture grazing, you know, they're farming for biodiversity. You know, but like by and large, we have this like monocrop agriculture system that is set up to reward like enormous agribusinesses, you know, driving yield efficiencies, focusing on yield per acre. And it's more similar to this like extractive model of take, make, waste, and that can be done organically, right? You can farm organically in a way that does not, you know, take soil health into account. And healthy soil has tremendous benefits overall, but one of the big ones from an environmental perspective, which I know is the focus of the Conscious Design, you know, podcast, is that it's more effective at sequestering carbon, pulling carbon, you know, out of the atmosphere and storing it, you know, in the ground. So like decarbonizing, right? You know, I think about like companies that are trying to reduce their carbon footprint. You know, the soil is one of the best tools that we have. So like the differences between regenerative organic and conventional organic matter, but the challenge of that on a retail shelf and the confusion it can create is also real, you know. And I don't know, I don't have the answer, you know, for it. I think
we're still looking for the answer, but it's an active, you know, I just see this happening in real time. And it's one of those, like, it's just an interesting thing that I think we need to, I don't know, maybe do the same thing you guys did. Oh, okay, this is the actual definition.
There is that, right? So and this is, you know, I'm going to get a little out of my like lane of true, you know, expertise, I guess, you know, in this, but I'm very passionate about this stuff too. And so if you look at regenerative food, you know, there's two main certifications in North America. One is the regenerative organic certification that you were referencing earlier. It's ROC, and then there's also one through Regenified, you know, they're called, and they both have. There's also the Soil Health Initiative, which has, you know, its own interconnected relationship with the other two. And so it's these definitions exist, these certification standards exist, but the confusion also exists. And both for upcycled and regenerative, you know, I think there's a lot of power that a brand has in actually cutting through the noise and telling an authentic story. And there's some great examples out there of this, both in the upcycled and the regenerative space, of telling a coherent and clear story and backing it up with the numbers, you know, where people can look up online and actually see what these practices are and what they mean. And, you know, there are label readers out there. Not everyone cares about everything, but like as we see it, like someone cares about each of the things, right? And so you certainly have to talk the walk, you know, but it's so that people know to look a little more. But you've got to you kind of do all the right things, do them right, and have that available for people to look for. That kind of transparency is what people expect, and they should, because we've been duped before as the public. Yeah,
I feel like it's been a long string of duping, and that's not really helping the marketing side. For how have you guys? Because I can imagine that when you say upcycled food, that can bring a lot of different ideas to somebody's head. How have you guys approached getting that terminology? And I know you built an organization around it and everything. How have you gone about getting people on board and understanding this is what upcycled is? It's, you know, not your kids' food going, it's these are things over here. How's that journey been for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, maybe like now that we're about halfway into the show or so, would be a good time to actually share with people what our business model is, and I'll use that to segue into answering your question. So, like commercially, what Upcycled Foods Inc. does is we develop and introduce commercial ingredients. You know, so we sell food ingredients to food makers that are upcycled and can then qualify for these upcycled claims. Our first product that we did in the ingredients business is called Regrain Supergrain Plus. This is the brewer's grain turned into a shelf-stable powder that can be incorporated as a fortifying inclusion in breads and snacks and pastas and, you know, anywhere that you'd see a carb. You know, you can put Super Grain Plus into, and it's going to improve the nutritional profile, bring great flavor, and bring the sustainability benefits. And we work with food makers as well as retailers and different end market uses like food service operators as well, which is a really big segment around creating markets for these products that are well, the markets exist, tapping into these markets with products that are made with upcycled ingredients, and we sell these upcycled ingredients. And then we also have an innovation arm of our business where we work as a partner with different people in the industry, helping them, for example, evaluate their own waste streams and try to enable them to do upcycling themselves, or we get involved with product development. There's a lot that we do kind of through a services model that we have that supports what we're doing as an ingredients business. Part of our journey, though, to here today involved actually launching a consumer brand in the early days, where we actually created our own finished goods and introduced those into the product. So we actually had firsthand experience getting products onto the retail shelf and testing different kinds of messaging. And
you actually proved it out.
Yeah, we at least proved the principle. We saw lots of challenges with that and realized we needed to focus, on what, stick to your knitting, kind of thing. Focus on what our actual theory for change was for the industry, and really double down on that, especially after the pandemic, which is maybe a story for another time. But what our experience has told us, and this is supported by the various market research that we pulled together over the years too, we feel the upcycled message is quite effective in a B2B context, where you're working with other professionals that maybe working with an organization that already has made external commitments around food waste reduction. Something like 3/4 of the world's 250 biggest food and beverage companies have made public commitments around reducing food waste. This language resonates, and it works in that business-to-business context. It can in a consumer-facing context as well, but we've learned that we don't need to be so heavy-handed necessarily with a finished good and how that's positioned in the market. That it's actually a lot easier to meet consumers where they already are by focusing on claims that they're already looking for. So, for example, low net carb or keto friendly, something that's really big in the industry right now. You can make products because of the nutritional profile of the upcycled Super Grain Plus ingredient that we have. You can get to a keto claim or a low net carb claim or a high fiber claim, and oh, by the way, it's upcycled. So we're increasingly focused on how our ingredients can help actually tap into existing trends as sort of this macro enabler, for that.
Right, it's your cracked door entrance. Get it? Just get the foot in, and then you're in.
Yeah, and let's get them with the by the way, and let's rely on it as a reason for loyalty, but for reason for purchase. We don't want to rely on the altruism, of the consumer. We don't want them to feel like they're buying a loaf of bread as a way of making their donation for the week, or something like that. We want them to buy delicious bread that is nutrient dense, that's at a price point that works for their family, and they can feel extra good about it because that bread was produced in a way that is also better for food system, for creating a nature positive food system, more sustainable, more regenerative, and there's also ways that they can try to understand that on their end. But making that available for that to be a reason for loyalty, more so than relying on it for a reason for purchase, has been something that we've increasingly focused on, and providing our customers. So these are brands that you might find in stores like Whole Foods or Misfits Market, for example, online, with storytelling brand assets. They have a little seal on their pack that says powered by Super Grain Plus, and that's a call out, just like you might see probiotics, on a BC30, for example, you see on food products. And so that's another tool that we've given our customers, so that they can kind of signal, that there's a deeper story here for those that want to look into it. But at the end of the day, we want to meet people where they are with great tasting food that's nutrient dense, that's at a price point that works for their families.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you're coming from that approach of not selling the sustainability first, because that seems to be just in the last couple of years, that's it feels like a trend for successful brands. More and more brands that we're sustainable, and that's great, but their product wasn't as good, right? Hanging your hat only on sustainable, that was your only differentiating factor, and the rest was okay to not good. I feel like you could get away with that for a while, But those companies are starting to not do so well. And there's more of this trend towards, tell us what your product actually does. How does it actually help me and my problems? And then if I can feel good about it too, then that's like that extra bit to go, yeah, that's great. I have a really good food. It tastes really good. It has all the nutrition I want. And it happens to be sustainable. Even better. But
Yeah.
it's not.
By the way, right? Yeah.
By the way.
Yeah. And, I think that basically my outlook on this is that we're heading also towards a reality in which, on the flip side of that, if it comes to light that a company is not doing things in the most conscious way possible, they're going to be penalized, right? And they're going to lose brand loyalty. And so it's also, we hope that more brand leaders out there are both thinking of the positive opportunity to bring in, the types of conscious consumers that practically care about this, but also recognize that there's brand risk that they need to mitigate in not doing the right thing, because it's going to come forward in an age of just radical transparency that we're in today, where people expect more. And even if you look at food waste specifically, like there's a study that went out, and I don't know if you can do links after the show, or how you like to provide more information, but there's a study that came out that I think 61% of those surveyed in this study wished that their brands or retailers were doing more to reduce food waste, and almost the same number as 57% felt that actually they're disappointed that their brands aren't doing enough. People are thinking about this, and that's only going to increase with the variable of time.
Right. I feel like we're past the tipping point, and it is already, we're here, and it's going to be even more so an expectation that if you are a brand and you're producing a product, you have to have thought about this. If you haven't thought about, if it's not even been thought about, then at some point someone will call you out, and that will be, especially if you have brand recognition, you will end up as slightly tarnished, at least for a while, until you correct your wayward ways and get back onto it. And it's interesting because now I feel like we've entered into, before it was kind of like more of just a carrot mentality of like, oh, we feel good about it. But now the stick is starting to come with customers. Like you said, they will be against a brand. There's actual consequences. And it's not just, oh, you might get fined, or it's not just a government thing. It's the consumer base is now having a stick and a carrot. Yeah, we'll pay more for your product. We'll buy it. We love it. And if you don't, we're going to destroy you on social media or things like that.
Yeah. Well, and that's where the kind of the collective consciousness of the consumer, is actually going to create a rising tide for business, right? By necessity, right? Because that, like what we're talking about is like then, we're ratcheting up the expectations, and I don't want us to be waiting for the consequences in order to change course, right? Like we're dealing with some very urgent, do it now, yeah, do it yesterday, and we have the tools. We need to do it. We have companies that exist in the B2B space to help accelerate that transition. Two of them are having a conversation on this podcast right now, right? And it's a shameless plug, and like we can do this, and we're better together. So yeah, so let's do it.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, and it's kind of been my internal philosophy for years at this point. I'm 1,000% certain we have all the solutions to all of our problems now. We just need to listen to the people that have those solutions and not be as afraid of making some changes. And I it's a big shift, right? Even as you're talking about the food industry, we just took coffee. Go back to our coffee example. There's 2 other products that could easily be produced. But it's not what they know, right? If I make beans, you're not an expert in selling the fruit, processing the fruit, selling the leaves, right? You don't, and as soon as you step out of your comfort zone, we all get uncomfortable. Like that's a human condition for most of us. I know there are all those people that they are very comfortable doing that, but for the rest of us, it's very uncomfortable. And so but that step could 2, 3x your income. That could be a whole new industry for your coffee plant.
Yeah, and I don't want to overlook the demand side, of this. So like what we're talking about is it's a market failure, right? The market has failed to produce the outcome that is producing the most benefit for the most people. And there's a very clear incentive for, like, say, a coffee, processor to create 3 products instead of 1. And, I think, what you'll hear from them is, okay, well, but then who's going to buy this, right? And so, when we think of the stakeholders that are required in this, this value chain or this ecosystem, it's really, like, I don't know if any representatives from a retailer or from, like, a food service operating group, like a restaurant chain or something like that, is listening to this show. But you have, if you're listening, like a lot of power to say, I want to see more items on my menu that are made with regeneratively sourced, upcycled sourced ingredients. And then that will like the supply will meet the demand, right? And so, if you're a large, you chain of small cafes or something like that, and commit to putting a cold brew coffee leaf tea on your menu, and that that matters too. The demand side matters a lot. The end demand of the consumer, that it's like latent demand that's there, but we need more of these options to actually be put on shelf, be put on menus, and that comes from the decision makers that are curating those mixes.
Well, I think that's a good point, and I would add to that, you don't know what you don't know. Like I've never had a coffee fruit. Like I don't even know where I would be able to get one. But it could be the newest fruit to sell like crazy. Like nobody knows. So I think there's also that level of like maybe just the rethinking. I go, okay, well, we think it's waste right now, but what happens if we actually just cut the fruit up and ship it over to a store in Florida and see where it goes? Like do a campaign, like see what happens. It could explode. It could be another coffee level sized. You have enough of them, right? And there's for every bean there's a fruit. So
yeah, that's right. But you need the retailer to say, I'm going to give you shelf space for that. Right, and so it's not, nothing can happen in a silo,
Silos are bad.
Yeah, silos are really, yeah, exactly. The show was good, and the book series was pretty good. But the
yes,
but in general,
all silos are bad now.
And I don't want to live in that silo, either. But it's good television. That's just I just think it's so important that we think about kind of reaching across to other stakeholders, and saying, hey, if I had this, would you do that? And having those coordinated conversations, because I think that's where there's a lot of power in the triangle. I guess is really what I'm getting at of relationships in this, and that's, and I think that's a critical component of addressing the market failure that we're currently living in, as it relates to these undervalued, and overlooked resources like that are represented by the upcycle industry.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It almost sounds like maybe there's already an event like this. So if somebody listening knows of it, send it to me. But there's got to be. It seems like there needs to be somebody that goes from a global level and just goes, hey, let's actually list out all of these materials that we actually have, because I've worked in product development a long time. I've worked in many different materials. I have nowhere near full knowledge of like all the different, let alone waste, right? I'm usually just familiar with what you're selling, right? I like what you're saying is I look at what's on the shelf space because I need it to go into a client's product. I need it available, and I need lots of it for whatever volume we're going to produce. And there's this other layer of, there's that probably 80% waste that's just sitting back there that nobody's promoting, nobody's talking about. But if you start to connect those dots, maybe it'll be like peas, where you find, hey, these over here, somebody using the other half that you were throwing away, and they actually just want it. You need a trade.
And to your point earlier, it's like we have the tools we need. It's about talking to each other and putting them to work.
Yeah, amazing. Well, this has been a great conversation. I feel like we could probably have a few more of these, just talking about food waste and what we can do with it. But to wrap up, though, for anybody that is interested in learning more, wants to work with you, has a food waste idea they think that you could use somewhere else, what's the best way to find you, and any closing remarks?
We'd love to hear from you. We're pretty easy to find. Our website's just upcycledfoods.com. So find us there. You can go to regrain.com. You can go to LinkedIn and just find me and reach out. I'm just Dan at upcycledfoods.com. Email me directly. Big believers in just having those early conversations, because you never know where they might lead. For those of you who eat food, which is hopefully everyone listening every day, seek out upcycled products. Some of the ones that our customers produce are available in retailers nationally. One of my favorite retailers is Misfits Market, which is an online retailer where they started doing cosmetically imperfect fruits and vegetables, and now they've built a whole grocery store experience online. And so our customers like Artorias, they have a mini naan that's made with regrained. There's a Stone and Skillet, has an English muffin that's made with regrained. Other items coming soon there too. So yeah, go try some of these and let us know what you think. So yeah, let's just think about it, chew on it, go do it.
Taste it.
And taste it. Tasting is believing. So yeah, thanks so much.
Amazing. Well, thanks, Dan. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me.
And that wraps up another episode of the Conscious Design Podcast. If today's episode inspired you to bring your product idea to life and turn it into a sustainable 7-figure business, visit petermanfirm.com or click the link below. Your ideas have the power to change the world, and we're here to help make that happen. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you on the next episode.